Hello and welcome to the Women of Color Coping Circle, the third workshop in the series of fourth workshop. Our first workshop on racialization, our second workshop was on working from home and wellness, and this is the third workshop on relationships and how relationships look different in the current times of COVID. My name is Ishita Arora. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a doctoral extern at the Counseling Center. This workshop is a brainchild of Dr. Whitney Hobson, who is a full time counselor and a staff psychologist at the Counseling Center. Her pronouns are she, her, hers, and she's not here with us recording this webinar, but she has been instrumental in creating these slides and delivering the webinars live with both me and Jen.
Mhm. And I'm Jen Martinez, pronouns they, them, theirs. I am a doctoral intern at the Counseling Center as well as a full time counselor there.
And we are happy to have you here with us. Let's just discuss a bit about the scope of this webinar. So the current presentation that we are presenting to you provides all of us an opportunity to reflect on our experiences and to also receive some resources regarding relationships and regarding therapy and emotional well-being during this time. This webinar is not supposed to be a substitute for psychotherapy. So if you need individual or group psychotherapy services, you can reach out to UMBC Counseling Center at the number 410-455-2472. You can leave a message requesting a consultation with a staff psychologist. You can also reach out to campus police in cases of any emergency. If you think there's any risk of self-harm, I would also want to just mention here that both Jen and I, we are mandatory reporters. And if there is any concern of self-harm, it would be better that you reach out to the campus police at 410-455-5555, or you can go to the nearest emergency room. So just a brief about what today's workshop or webinar will contain. We would always start all of our webinars with a quote. So today's webinar will also start with a quote. After that, we'll discuss some of the information related to today's topic on relationships, in which we'll be specifically talking about expectations, boundary setting, what does healthy or unhealthy relationship look like, and how to process different mechanisms of acculturation and generational gaps. And throughout the webinar, we'll pause for a minute or two to give you some time to reflect by using some prompts and some questions. You can take your time because this is a recorded webinar. You can take your time and pause there and maybe jot down your thoughts. And if you want to talk about it with your friends or family members, you can also share this with them. And this is just for you to have some reflection based on this topic. And at the later stage in the webinar, we'll discuss some resources for coping and some skills. And in the end, we'll set an intention and close the space for us. So as we said, let's set the mood with the quote for this particular topic for this third webinar. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed, said Carl Jung. And we use this particular picture because in the time of COVID, it's just so almost not recommended to meet other people who don't live in the same household as yours. Do not physically meet them, but physical distance doesn't mean social distance. We can still stay in social contact with people, even if we are 6 feet apart from them. That's why it's important that we take extra care of our relationship in these times. And it's important to understand that relationship happens when there are two or more people. And anything that happens in that relationship changes both of the people involved. So I've been talking for 5 minutes now, and I've shared so much information about the nuts and bolts of this webinar. And I just want to give you some time now to reflect on just thinking how COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting quarantine and physical distancing requirements have impacted your relationships. These relationships could be your intimate partner relationships, they could be your relationship with your family members, they could be your relationship with your community and the society at large. They could be relationship with your colleagues, with the students, with professors, with your work colleagues. So how COVID-19 pandemic has changed your relationships? Something else to think about is what are some of the challenges and triumphs that you have noticed as it relates to how you are engaging on relational and social connection at this time. And we ask for both challenges and triumphs because over our experience in the last 3, 4 months, we have seen that there have definitely been drawbacks, but there have also been new realizations of how we can stay in touch with people and still be connected no matter the physical distance. So what does that look like for you? And another prompt for you to focus on is what needs do you notice in your relationships that are not being met because of the current circumstances? And maybe through this webinar, we can help you figure out how to meet those needs. So if you want to pause here and take some time, these are big, deep questions. So if you want to take some time and think about it, feel free to pause. Um, but we will continue with our next slide.
Yes, thank you, Ishta. I think, that those question prompts really help us get a grounding of, maybe what's bringing us into this webinar today and really understanding, what are the relationships that um, we've really been able to reconnect with and what's been making that work in this when there's so many barriers right now for maintaining relationships and also what are things we may be much more aware of things that might not be working or specific problems that are coming up for us in our relationships. And so we want to present some skills or some things to be considering in terms of how to um, really cultivate the relationships that you want to be having in this moment. And so, kind of in thinking about different ways to approach maybe conflicts or any sort of interactions, that there are three different types of questions or considerations to keep in mind. So you may be, maybe in a conflict because you want to be getting something that you want, or your goal in a conflict may be maintaining that relationship and really doing and making choices to kind of maintain or repair that connection. And then the final one might be trying to really improve your own self-respect, particularly if you feel like you're one of the types of folks who want to give and give and give and you're not getting as much back in return, and that's taking a toll on you and how you feel valued and worthy. And so if any of these really resonate with you, we have um, a few things to be considering, particularly um, if there are ways of not knowing whether you should be asserting yourself or not in these situations, there's a few points to consider. So, um, that you might be wanting to advocate for getting what you want in an interaction, going to this first row, if it's related to your legitimate right to getting um, some access to um, any sort of resource or anything like that. If you're trying to get someone to do something for you, um, if you're trying to refuse an unwanted or unreasonable request, um, if you're trying to resolve a conflict or wanting to get your opinion taken seriously. And the reason why we have it split up in these three different categories is because we have specific skills um, to help meet those needs depending on what your goal is. And so, if you're feeling like you're wanting to approach an interaction to try to get something that you want, some things you might want to ask yourself is, what is the thing that I want from this interaction? What is my actual goal? And then what do I have to do to get the results? And what will work? What will be the most effective? Um, we may also want to have an interaction or some sort of discussion um, to really help maintain a good relationship. Our goal in that conflict may be to keep that connection. So we might choose this if our immediate goals in that moment is to have a good long-term relationship with this individual. And we want to remember why that relationship is important to you now and in the future. So you might ask yourself, what do I want the other person to feel about me after this interaction? And what do I have to do to get or keep this relationship? And I think this is something to think about if you're noticing some sort of pattern in terms of in conflicts, you might be focusing more on either getting what you want or kind of really trying to maintain your self-respect and be very assertive in some ways that can when there isn't that flexibility or that balance, then those things may be getting in the way of maintaining that relationship. And so this might be an area if this is something you don't attend to as much to be asking yourself to be much more intentional in those conversations of what can I be doing in this moment to maintain or keep this relationship. And then this final one is, keeping or improving self-respect. So really trying to respect your own values and beliefs. I think, for some folks, it may be really easier or the natural inclination is to not set boundaries, right? That we give and give and give, and we don't really um, kind of feel like we can ask for things in return. And maybe feel taken advantage of in our relationships. And so something you might want to ask yourself is, how do I want to feel about myself after the interaction is over? What do I have to do to feel that way about myself, and what will work? And so these are questions to remind yourself in the midst of that conversation to help guide the behavior that you want to be engaged in to be able to reach the goal that you have um, in that relationship. And so, particularly for the that first piece about, I'm going to go back just to remind you, getting what I want. Again, this is really trying in an argument, maybe trying or some sort of conflict, really trying to get the other person to understand or do the thing you want them to do, right? I think this is probably a very frequent reason why people get into conflicts is that there is a um, kind of some sort of mismatch in terms of what you want the person to do versus what they're doing, right? And I think what can be really difficult is that we can't control others' behaviors, and so Dear Man is just some way of framing the conversation that can help kind of give that other person the um, reinforcement or motivation for them to act in the way or do something in the way that is in line with what you want them to be doing. And so Dear Man sounds weird. Also, um, the image that comes to mind is probably really bizarre, but it's an acronym. Um, of all of the different skills that you might be wanting to utilize and consider in effectively doing this. So first one is describing the situation. So this is really without judgments or accusations, just stating what the facts are of what happened, right? And I think this is usually where folks run into trouble, right? That often when we're trying to describe the situation, we might be using a tone or kind of making an accusation about what they're doing or assumption of their intent. And what happens then is that the person may automatically feel defensive. And so if you're able, as much as you can to just describe the facts of that situation. And once you state what happened, to say how that situation ended up making you feel. So really emphasizing the I statements. So you did this and this and this happened, and I felt you know ignored or disrespected, right? I think the reason we want to be using I statements is because that makes it harder for that other person to challenge the reality of how you feel, right? And I think it also helps minimize some of the defensiveness. And I think, because we might say like, well, you made me feel this way, kind of again creates more defensiveness that may make it harder then to help get the person to be willing to make that change. Okay, so first we're describing just what happens, saying how it affects you, and then being explicit about what it is you want to change. Okay, so, making it very clear to them, like, this is a specific thing that I would want them to do differently, and then reinforce that. So try to think about what would make this benefit that other person, right? This is going back to, we want them to really feel on board with this change, right? And I think I am less likely to want to change something if it doesn't benefit me, in some way. It and I think once we're able to hear what that is, then there's a little bit more buy-in. And then thinking about M for mindful. So can you stay focused on this objective? I think what can often happen in these types of arguments is that, um, other past um, conflicts or misunderstandings might get thrown in, right? That there may be like, well, you did this before, or this was fine, when I was doing this last week. And I think if you start to get sidetracked, then you're more likely to um, steer away from being able to just get this one particular goal met. And then the last piece, or not the last piece, but another piece to be considering is to appear confident. So consider your tone, your eye contact, your body language, because I think people will be much more responsive if it seems like it's something really important to you, right? I think that if you're feeling a little on the fence about whether this is a good idea, then that gives that other person a little bit more room to push back. And, if this is something that's really important to you and is really, um, I don't want to go back to the other side because, well, let me see if I can do that really quickly. Right, that if it's meeting any of these things, that it's your legitimate right, or you're trying to get your opinion taken seriously or resolve a conflict, that you hold on, all right, that you want to have that goal met. And so these are just pieces of trying to increase the likelihood that that goal will be met. And then the last piece is being willing to negotiate. So if you have stated all of these things that you would want them to change and the reasons why it would be good for them for this to change, and there's a point where they're like, well, this isn't actually realistic, then can you then negotiate on what that could look like? Right, because the reality is that sometimes the things that we want aren't always realistic or doable, particularly if it's in a short amount of time. And so we have a little example here to try to exemplify or illustrate what this could look like. So maybe imagine you know, your roommate isn't washing the dishes and it's getting to the point, you know, you're running late to go to work or to go to class, and you just needed one bowl or for, you know, cereal or for coffee, and there are no um, a mug for coffee, not a bowl for coffee. I hope people aren't drinking bowls of coffee. But you don't have those dishes and you end up getting late and it's really inconvenient and you're really annoyed and you're wanting to have a conversation then with your roommate about this. So your goal in this moment is to get your roommate to wash the dishes. So you might start off by describing what happened. So when I went to cook breakfast this morning, there weren't any clean dishes or utensils that I could use. Right? There's no accusation here. Nothing like you never wash any of the dishes or anything like that. It's just stating when I went to cook breakfast, there weren't any clean dishes or utensils. And then express, you know, how this made you feel. Right? Again, using those I statements. I felt really frustrated because cleaning dishes took time away from my already hectic morning. And then have the ask piece. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to wash dishes by the end of the night so that they are clean in the morning. And then the kind of secret ingredient to this is the reinforcement piece, and trying to find a reason why this ask, them meeting this ask, would be beneficial for them. This way you don't have to worry about cleaning during the day and they won't be piled up over time. Right? You can be creative. It can be different things. This is the only thing I can think about why how you can reinforce someone, a roommate, about this. Um, and again, being mindful. So as you're having this discussion, trying not to, if they bring up other accusations, maybe bringing up a time that you didn't clean dishes or anything like that, not veering off of this conversation and really sticking to, well, this is just one thing, you know, that may, you know, that I'm hoping that both of us could do, right? That in the morning, at least we have dishes that are um, ready or clean for the rest of the day. And really trying to focus back um, on that ask piece. Again, trying to appear confident and be really firm in this, that this is something that will help improve the quality of your life and also the quality of your roommate's life. And then if they aren't able to do that, you know, if there are reasons why they can't wash all the dishes by the end of the night, maybe then you can negotiate. So if you don't have to clean all of, if you can't clean all the dishes, maybe we can both make sure at least one plate and one utensil is cleaned by the end of the day. Right? So one finding something that can help you um, get a piece of the behavior that you want, even if it's not the full extent of that.
Thank you for sharing that very important dear man skill, which is so useful for all of us in our day-to-day life, and it comes in handy when we are dealing with conflict situations. Um, so moving on from dear man, it's also important that we understand what does a healthy and unhealthy relationship look like. And often we might find that the boundaries are blurry, or we might get blindsided. So having this slide is helpful for us as a reminder of what is it that we deserve to have in a relationship that can help us grow as individuals and as partners. So a healthy relationship includes trust, respect, safety, and security, in which both of the people, or a family and a person or colleagues, they all respect each other's individuality and privacy. Healthy relationships are maintained with friends and family and colleagues, and they include activities that you can indulge in on your own apart from one another. So it's not a 24/7 overlap of each other into each other's space, but you can have your own privacy in your own space. In a healthy relationship, you don't have to worry about violence in the relationship, and that violence could be emotional violence or verbal violence or gaslighting or other kinds of violence. And if the relationship is healthy, you don't have to worry about offending someone or getting into a conflict as much. In a healthy relationship, people respect each other's sexual boundaries and accept influence, and they both give and take influence. There's a good middle point, and there's a good negotiation and compromise in which both of the people's needs are met. Healthy relationship also comprise of conflicts because conflicts are pretty normal in all kinds of relationships. But in healthy relationships, those conflicts are resolved fairly and in a non-violent way. Unhealthy relationships, on the other hand, put one person before the other by neglecting one person in that relationship. And unhealthy relationships try to completely overlap each other's space, and people often lack privacy in unhealthy relationships. Unhealthy relationships also comprise in which there are no common friends between people, and there are no common hobbies or interests, and people can lack interest in each other's friends and family. Unhealthy relationship also is characterized by both the people in the relationship feeling the pressure to change who they are for the other person, people feeling worried when disagreeing with the other person because it might have negative consequences or violence or unresolved conflict. If people in a healthy relationship also feel pressure to quit healthy activities like that they usually enjoy just to please their partners. If you enjoy going for a walk alone, but your partner only wants to be with you all the time in the house watching TV, that's something that's not really healthy. Um, Unhealthy relationship also involve partners' refusal to use safer sex methods, which is sort of a sexual violence in which you want to use safer sex practices, but your partner does not want to, or would either get annoyed with you when you want to use safe sex methods. Unhealthy relationship also involve arguments that are not really settled fairly, in which one person is trying to overcompromise themselves to please the other person, and people attempt to control or manipulate each other using various means. It could be financial means, it could be using children, it could be using each other's family members, or just gaslighting. And unhealthy relationship also compromises the access to resources, in which one person would have more access to resources and other person would have less access to resources. And those resources could be financial resources, or those resources could be social support, which is a form of resource. But in an unhealthy relationship, one person always have more resources than the other. So it's important that we realize if we are in a healthy relationship or unhealthy relationship. And if we want to make our current relationships more healthy, we can go over some exercises to set very firm boundaries with the other person that we are in a relationship with, and set certain expectations that other person understands and we understand, so that both of us are on the same page. And again, just to pointed out that this relationship can be romantic, can be non-romantic, can be with a colleague, can be with a family member, can be with friends. And these are two slides that we have right now, in which if we ever feel that we don't really know what to do in this current situation, then you can ask yourself these questions, and based on the answer, you can go forward and make a decision. So this is sort of a decision chart for you to keep in mind, which comes really handy for me personally, I know, and I know other people have used it too, and it has been effective. So imagine I have to ask Jen, our co-facilitator, about $500. I need $500 in my life right now, and I have to ask them something. So I will ask myself these following questions before asking this favor from Jen. My first question would be, can Jen give me what I want? So does Jen have $500? What if Jen themselves are going through financial hardships and cannot give me $500? Should I still ask them about that money? So we can ask ourselves, is this yes or no? For the second question, is this a good time to ask? What if Jen is currently traveling, they are out of touch and I can't reach them, or Jen themselves are going through some personal concerns of their own, or maybe they are on a vacation and I'm bothering them, asking them, hey, can I have $500 right now? So what's the good time for me to ask this? Am I prepared? Am I prepared to tell them that this is what I need, why do I need it, and when will I return it? Do I appear confident, taking from the Dear Man technique? The next question would be, do I have a right to what I'm asking for? What if Jen is someone that I met a week ago and I'm asking Jen, I need $500. Do I have that kind of right to ask Jen for $500? If Jen would be a family member to me, then maybe I have that right. But if Jen is a colleague that I know since an year, I would not have that right to ask that kind of money. And again, it depends. If it's just $10 versus if it's $5, I might be able to ask for $10. Maybe I forgot my card at home and we are out at a social distance way, but going to have an ice cream. We can ask for $10. But when it comes to $500, we have to see if I have a right to ask for that kind of money. Next question is this request appropriate to the relationship? Again, you can ask for that kind of money from your partner, from your family members, but I can't really go and ask for $500 from my advisor, from my professor, from a colleague, from a stranger, from a roommate. So just understanding what is that request and what's the kind of relationship I have with the person from whom I'm asking this request. Am I asking less than I give? Maybe I gave Jen $1,000 a month ago and Jen has not returned my money and now I'm asking for $500. I think in that case, it would be completely appropriate for me to ask that. And it doesn't have to be $500. It could be just, hey, I want to go out with you. When I gave my time to indulge in an activity that Jen wanted to do a week ago, it should be okay for me to also want that Jen indulge in an activity that I want to do right now. Another question would be, is asking important for long-term goal? For some relationships, it is important that we ask other person the needs that we have. So if I want to spend time together with a partner, that is important for a long-term relationship. And if it's not important, if it's something very small, which is again $10, and it's not really important for a long-term goal, then I might not ask that question. And the final one brings back the confidence piece from Dear Man. Am I acting competent? Do I know what I want? Do I know why I want it? And do I have that competency to return that favor to the person I'm asking this for? So if you ask all of these questions to yourself before asking something from someone, and most of the answers are yes, then no, then for most yeses, you can actually go ahead and ask that question. But if you find more no's than yes, then it would be better to rethink some of these questions and see how we can improve in going forward and expecting that kind of some uh, favor from another person. And the next slide is more about how do we respond if someone else asks us for a favor. And what I've seen generally, mostly in our culture, especially for women and especially for women of color, we are expected to say yes to everything because saying no is considered offensive in so many cultures in so many ways, especially when it comes from women. So being assertive and setting that boundary with a partner, with a colleague, with family members is really important. But sometimes there's an overwhelming feeling of guilt or overwhelming feeling of obligation that I should be doing this just because I am this person. But we might just overstep ourselves sometimes and compromise our own mental well-being for another person. In those situations, just to keep things very logical and objective, we can ask ourselves these questions and see what's the final answer, and we can reply to the request based on what this grid tells us. So the first question, imagine Jen is asking me $500. So first question I would ask myself is, do I have what Jen wants from me? Maybe I have $500 and I can give this to Jen, but maybe I don't. So do I even have what I want, what Jen wants from me? If Jen wants to spend some time together, do I have that kind of time right now or not? Maybe I'm working on my dissertation and I don't have that time. So it's important that I understand what is it that I have that I can provide. instead of specially making out that space and overstepping my own mental well-being to provide this. Second question is it a bad time for me to say no? Maybe it is a bad time. Jen really needs $500 or they really need social support right now. And for me, right now, their mental health and their financial security is more important than my own dissertation and my own bank account. So, what is it that they want and how badly it is that they need that? Third question would be, is the request clear? What if Jen is like, hey, I just want a huge lump sum of money? And is that request clear? That request is very vague. And what does a huge lump sum of money feel like? We would not know. Another request that someone can ask us is, hey, I want to get to know you better. And that's a request and that's a demand, but you don't really know what does it entail. What do you mean by that? So maybe you can ask more questions and probe how is it that I can support you in this? Fourth question would be, does saying no violate the other person's rights? If my mom is asking me for $500, they would have a different relationship with me, and maybe they have a right to ask me that kind of money. But if it's a stranger that I don't really know and I have met only 2, 3 times is asking me that kind of money, then maybe I'm not really violating that person's rights. And it's okay for me to give, it's okay for me to say no to them. But if someone else who's really needing that kind of money and I have the ability to provide this to them and they promise that they'll return it to me, then I don't think I will be violating their rights if I give them the money. Next question we can ask ourselves is the request appropriate? What if Jen is asking me for $10,000? That's a lot. I don't have that money. The request is not appropriate. I can't give them that kind of money. If someone is asking us to have sex without any protection, and that request, according to me, would not be appropriate because I would want to have sex with safer sex practices. So just trying to find out for ourselves what do we feel is appropriate and what is not appropriate. Does person give me a lot and do I owe that person? So maybe I owe Jen some money and that person, Jen, has given me a lot already. So if I owe them already, both either in kind or in financial terms, then I should be able to say yes. But if it's only one-sided relationship, when I'm always giving and I'm not receiving anything in return, then I have all the right to say no. Second last question is, does saying no interfere with my long-term goal? Maybe it does. Maybe my long-term goal is to have a healthy relationship with my partner, and saying no interferes with that. But what if my long-term goal is to get a PhD and my partner wants me to just spend all the time with them without really working on my PhD milestones? Then spending that kind of time with my partner is actually hampering my long-term goal, and I would want to establish some boundaries there. And the final question we can ask ourselves is, does saying yes maintain my self-respect? Sometimes, again, we walk all over ourselves or we let other people walk all over us just so that we can make them happy and cater to their needs. But it's important that we take care of ourselves and understand where are those boundaries for us to maintain our own self-respect. And after we establish that we are in a safe space where we are respected, then we can go forward and give other people what is it that they want from us. So when someone asks you for something and you would have some trouble deciding what to say, you can go through these questions. And if you have more yeses than nos, then you can go forward and say yes. But if you have more nos than yes, then it's completely all right to say no to that person and set those firm boundaries with them.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful in thinking about, because I think sometimes we're in situations and we often maybe more inclined to say yes or no to things without really having that reflection on like what is that impact on the relationship and our own needs and our own long-term things. So I appreciate you taking the time to kind of go through that decision making process. um, we want to spend a little bit of time just acknowledging that I think sometimes relationship conflicts maybe around um, identity related differences. So particularly, I think for women of color and for really any family, that there are generational differences that impact our ability to relate to one another and understand one another's experiences. Because, in the same way that our own culture can impact our own values and the ways that we see the world, I think the socio-political context in which we are raised also impacts that. And so this chart kind of starts to break down a little bit all these generational differences, at least within the US, of what are some things that are really that are different across these different generation groups. If we think about baby boomers who have gone through, the world wars, through maybe even um, the Cold War and all of these other pieces, and where job security was a big um, aspiration, right? Kind of coming out of the different wars where there was some financial rebuilding in the country, and so that there are ways that has been a key marker for their aspirations. Um, they may not, their signature product in their lifetime or in that generation, maybe the advent of the television, and maybe prefer communication through telephone and prefer face-to-face contact. Whereas if we're thinking about, you know, our current generations, whether that's generation X, Y, or Z, that we have a very different life experience and ways of communication. If we look at the communication preferences just across these generations, that it is so different, and so that impacts how we communicate in our own relationships, right? And so for me, as someone who is in generation Y, yeah, I prefer communicating through text or social media. And if that's the only way I'm communicating, say, with my mom, who prefers to talk on the phone or prefers face-to-face contact, then there are times when my communication style is not meeting her needs for us to maintain um, kind of a healthy relationship. And so part of this is really taking time to understand what are these generational differences and how might they be impacting the ways um, we're in relation to other folks, because then we can make adjustments and attend to that to help minimize any sort of um, kind of misunderstandings that could be attributed to these generational differences. And then we have another slide that really kind of illustrates how there's just how generational patterns not only impact our own culture and some of the different markers of huge um, kind of life-changing moments, um, that I think we also need to be thinking about, like, if we're looking at leadership style, kind of how we even integrate or work in a group format, right? Whether that's with looking at this baby boomer generation being much more directing and like much more top down, whereas maybe Generation Z and Gen Alpha is much more kind of working with a group and really not even being directive, but really almost empowering or inspiring the people we're working with so that we're all collectively doing better, right? And so that's a very different way of working and recognizing that there is ways that you know that those generational norms also come into our relationships and impact the way that we maybe see um, how relationships should be um, run in a way. And so we might be experiencing, either this may be something we've been experiencing for a while, or maybe it's becoming highlighted as we're in this pandemic, um, about some of these generational clashes. So one might be within family about, what are the different roles and expectations, um, that, as we're even thinking back to those leadership styles, right? That younger generations want to be much more collaborative in that, in the decision making processes, and ways that might clash specifically around the expectation from elders for younger generations to do what's been told and be follow directives, right? um, and that might also be a cultural, like different cultural norms as well, of this is how families or the cultural values um, kind of entail in terms of the deferring to, our elders in that way. You might be noticing different technology gaps, especially as we're becoming much more remote and relying on technology. We're seeing differences in terms of expressing ourselves through technology and being able to remain in contact with others. Um, and that even generational differences in our families create that there are clashes based on what we want to do in terms of our career and education, and that these clashes may not only happen at home but also in the workplace. Thinking about who our supervisors are and leadership and colleagues, what generations are they a part of, what are the cultural factors that impact the way they communicate, and um, the skills that they value and emphasize, um, and being able to highlight that. I think that's important to be able to notice, and to then address what those differences are, right? That I think sometimes when it's invisible, it doesn't feel like there's any sort of resolution to it. But if we can be highlighting, what are generational pieces that are patterns, and how can we be kind of negotiating so that these different styles are being met. And so I started to allude to cultural clashes. And so I'm not going to go into, for the sake of time, go into all of the details of this, but really wanting to highlight that, that there are pieces of our identities that also impact um, our ability to have like a similar understanding of the world and of ourselves, right? Whether it's if we or our family members are immigrants, and how much of our respective values are tied to like US culture versus our heritage values and culture and those norms, right? And that those create conflicts within ourselves and then within families as well. And that this also can happen with this Berry model, I think, is what it incorporates in this is the dynamics and conflicts that can happen based on um, both privileged and marginalized identities. This could be within our own families, or even in our workspaces, right? That all of these different pieces impact our ability to understand each other, and because there are a lot of different ways that we might be different, that can then increase the likelihood of some sort of clash, because it's hard to always understand what those differences are and how to address those relationally.
That was really important, and some of those things were something that were very new for me too, especially when it comes to acculturation and how do we navigate being a part of two different cultures. It's also very important to understand that most of those slides related to baby boomers and Generation XY are very US centric, and the whole process of acculturation is also very US centric. So, some of us who might be international students or people from various other cultures living in the US, it might look something different for us, but this these slides were there for us to have that basic framework of what does it look like in the US. So again, so much information that we've provided, and we really hope that some of it was useful for you, and you could take some of it back with you and maybe share with others and think more about in your own day-to-day life. That's why we have this final slide here, which talks about what is this particular intention that you would set for yourself based on today's webinar, the information provided, and the topic of relationships. So, out of all the things that we have discussed so far, what is that one thing from this workshop that you would like to incorporate into your daily life? And you can take time to pause here and think more about it. Maybe go back on the previous slides and see, oh, I noticed something and maybe I want to revisit that, and this is something I want to work in. And it can also change. Maybe you set one intention and work over it for a month or a few weeks and you achieve it and you want to go back and work on something else. So it's important that we do set for ourselves those intentions, those personal goals that we want to achieve and accomplish, so that we can better care for ourselves and our relationships as well.
Yeah, thank you, Isha. And again, if you needed more time on that, please feel free to pause at this point. But we'll go ahead at this moment to provide some of the resources in case these are helpful for you. So the Counseling Center has additional webinar topics around the Women of Color Coping Circle. So some of the additional topics available is the virus, racialization, inequity and oppression, working from home wellness, and then uncharted territory, grieving the uncertain and unknown. And if you do want any further information about the different resources or webinars that the Counseling Center is providing, we encourage you to go to our website, counseling.umbc.edu/webinar. You can also follow us on my UMBC, and then you can also follow us on social media. So we are at UMBC Counseling, both on Facebook and on Instagram. And this is just another overview of the different resources that we provide. In addition to the webinars, we do provide individual therapy, and while the university is remote, we are still taking new clients. So if you are a student enrolled at UMBC, you are eligible for those services. And so if you're interested in that, please contact us. We also have some crisis services. So if you need some support, we have staff who are available to consult with you. And then also we provide referral services if you're wanting to get connected to someone off campus, whether that's a psychologist or a psychiatrist. We have folks on staff that can help provide those resources. Thank you again. And yes, please feel free to reach out if you need any more resources and support.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening to us speak for that long and being a part of this workshop. And we really hope that it was useful and you'd want to listen to more of the content coming out of the Counseling Center.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.